The neon sign outside flickered as if it too was weary from the long night. Inside the quiet, near-empty diner, Rachel Thompson moved with the kind of exhausted grace that only came from working the graveyard shift too many nights in a row. Her sneakers squeaked faintly against the tiled floor as she wiped down the counter, the scent of burnt coffee lingering in the air. It was nearly 3 a.m., and she was counting down the minutes until she could lock the doors and go home. The bell above the entrance jingled unexpectedly, breaking the silence. She looked up, expecting a bleary-eyed trucker or an insomniac local. Instead, a man stepped in, wearing a suit so sharply tailored it seemed to cut through the room itself. His presence was commanding, controlled, polished, deliberate. Rachel watched as the man scanned the diner and selected a booth by the window. He moved like someone who owned the world, or at least a good piece of it. His expression was unreadable, eyes fixed on the city lights beyond the glass. When Rachel approached with her notepad, he didn't even glance at the menu. "Black coffee," he said with a clipped tone, offering nothing more. She scribbled it down and walked away, barely fazed by his cold demeanor. She had served all kinds before. When she returned and set the steaming mug before him, he didn't say thank you. But when he reached for his wallet, a small slip of paper fluttered to the ground. No, not paper. A photograph. Face up. The second Rachel's eyes landed on it, her breath caught in her throat. Her legs froze. Time felt like it stopped moving. There, smiling up from the floor, was her mother, Linda Thompson. The same gentle smile Rachel had memorized since childhood, the same photo her mother kept in a wooden memory box under her bed. 1,000 emotions crashed through her chest. How did this man, this stranger, have that photograph? She bent down, picked it up with trembling fingers, and turned to face him, her voice barely a whisper. "Where did you get this?" He looked at her then. Really looked at her. For a second, something shifted behind those icy blue eyes. His hand extended slowly, not aggressively, but with a strange detachment. "You must be mistaken," he said, taking the photo back as if it were meaningless and tucking it into his wallet with surgical precision. Rachel's chest constricted. Mistaken. She wasn't mistaken. She knew every freckle, every crease in that photo. Her mother had never spoken of powerful men or secrets, only sacrifice and love. "That's my mother," she said louder this time, firmer, pushing past the lump in her throat. Her name was Linda Thompson. "Why do you have her picture?" But the man only adjusted the cuff of his suit and stood without answering. He placed a $100 bill on the counter, nodded once, and turned to leave. Panic surged through Rachel as he reached the door. This might be the only chance she had to get answers. She rounded the counter, nearly knocking over a tray, and called out, "Please just tell me how you knew her." He paused at the threshold, hand resting on the door. For a heartbeat, she thought he might speak. His gaze met hers once more, cool and unreadable. Then, in a low voice, devoid of emotion, he said, "Forget this," and stepped into a sleek black car that had pulled up to the curb. In a flash, he was gone, swallowed by the night, leaving Rachel rooted to the sidewalk, trembling and breathless. She stood there long after the taillights disappeared. A millionaire, or maybe a billionaire, had walked into her life, dropped a piece of a puzzle she didn't even know existed, and left her with more questions than she could bear. Who was William Harris? Why did he carry her mother's photograph like a secret pressed close to the heart, only to pretend it meant nothing? Rachel's mind raced. Whatever the truth was, it had just cracked open the foundation of everything she thought she knew about her past. And one thing was certain: she wasn't going to let it go. Rachel didn't sleep that night. The moment her shift ended, she walked home under the weight of 1,000 thoughts, her mind circling the same question. Why did that man have her mother's photograph? The image haunted her. Not just the photo itself, but the way he looked at her, calculated, guarded, like someone with everything to lose. Once in her tiny apartment, she made herself a pot of stale coffee and opened her old laptop, fingers trembling as they typed into the search bar. She had no name, no receipt, no business card, Only his face burned into her memory, and the way he moved like he belonged at the top of the world. She searched keywords: billionaire real estate, New York, silver-haired CEO, real estate mogul, black car. Articles flooded her screen, names, headlines, photos, but none matched. Her frustration built with each passing hour, but then, just as her eyes began to blur from exhaustion, she froze. There he was, William Harris, founder and CEO of Harris and Carmda Holdings, a real estate empire that stretched across 5 states. His face looked exactly the same as it had hours before, only now accompanied by headlines like "Empire Builder Wall Street's Favorite Tycoon" and "The Man Who Bought Manhattan." But nowhere, not one single line, mentioned Linda Thompson. It was as if her mother had been erased from his story. Rachel stared at his photograph, her heart pounding. This was the man, the one who had left her standing in the dark, the one who had buried a piece of her history inside a leather wallet. And she needed answers. Real answers. By sunrise, she had already planned her next move. She dug through her closet and found her one decent blazer, the one she used for job interviews, then pulled her curls into a tight bun. If she couldn't get in through the front door, she would find another way. She memorized the building address of Harris & Carmda Holdings, then boarded the bus downtown, eyes locked on the glass skyline ahead. The building was a gleaming skyscraper of mirrored glass and steel, a shrine to wealth and power. Rachel walked through the rotating doors into a marble-floored lobby filled with men in tailored suits and women in heels that clicked like metronomes across the stone. At the reception desk, she tried confidence first. "I need to see William Harris," she said, steady as steel. The receptionist didn't even blink. "Do you have an appointment?" Rachel shook her head. "It's personal, urgent." The woman's smile was practiced empty. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harris doesn't take walk-ins." Rachel's eyes scanned the room. Security near the elevators, turnstiles that required ID badges. No way through unless she made one. She spotted a young employee juggling a coffee and a folder walking briskly toward the elevators. Rachel slipped into step beside him. "Hey," she said casually, "don't forget Mr. Harris still needs that finance report." The man blinked in confusion. "What?" She rolled her eyes and groaned. "Seriously, you were supposed to send it this morning." Flustered, he stopped mid-step, which gave her the perfect opening. She darted ahead, slipping through the turnstile just as his badge activated the sensor. The guard barely glanced up. She made it. Inside the elevator, she hit the top floor, heart-racing adrenaline blurring the edges of her fear. This was it. No more guessing. No more silence. She was going to get the truth. When the elevator doors opened, Rachel stepped into a reception area draped in cold elegance-polished wood, sleek art-thick carpet. A man in a dark suit was on her instantly. "Miss, do you have an appointment?" "No," she replied, voice sharp, shoulders squared. "But I need to see William Harris. It's about my mother, Linda Thompson." The name stopped him in his tracks. He didn't respond right away, but something shifted in his eyes. He disappeared down a hallway. Rachel waited, fists clenched, every second stretching longer than the last. Finally, a door opened. William Harris stepped out. The second he saw her, something flickered behind his eyes. Not surprise, not anger, something closer to resignation. He said nothing, simply gestured for her to follow. Rachel did her legs stiff, but her determination fierce. Inside his office, expansive and silent, he stood behind a massive desk like a man ready for a reckoning. Rachel didn't wait. "Why did you have a photograph of my mother?" She asked, each word laced with quiet fury. William didn't look away this time. Slowly, he reached into his desk drawer, pulled out the same worn photograph, and placed it between them like a ghost. "I didn't just know her," he said, voice low. "I loved her." Rachel's breath hitched. The room fell into silence. And in that moment, the search for truth was no longer about suspicion. It was about unlocking the buried past of a mother who had carried a secret her entire life. For a long moment, Rachel couldn't speak. The words hung between them. I loved her. It didn't make sense. Not in this room. Not with this man. Not after everything he had done. She stared at the photo he'd placed on the desk, the same one she had seen slip from his wallet like a ghost from the past. Her mother, Linda Thompson, looking serene, unaware that this frozen image would one day unravel her daughter's reality. Rachel's voice was low, tight with disbelief. "Then why did you leave her?" The question seemed to pierce the quiet office like a blade. William Harris leaned back his shoulders, heavy eyes dark with memory. "Because I was a coward," he said, the confession falling out of him like a wound reopening. His jaw tensed as he looked past her, as though seeing another version of his life in the distance. "My family made it clear if I stayed with Linda, I would lose everything. My inheritance, my company, my place in their world. They didn't say it with threats. They didn't need to. It was understood." He ran a hand down his face, weary. "At the time, I convinced myself that I could come back for her later, that once I had secured everything, once I had control, I could find her again and fix what I had broken." Rachel's stomach twisted. The man before her spoke of love and regret, but the damage had already been done. Her mother had raised her alone with quiet grace, and not a single complaint. She had done it without help, without excuses, and certainly without this man. "So you left her for money," Rachel whispered, not as a question, but a verdict. William didn't deny it. His silence was louder than words. "I thought I was being strategic," he finally said, voice flat. "But I was just being selfish." His eyes fell to the pendant around her neck, the one Rachel had found tucked away in her mother's belongings just hours ago. "By the time I realized what I'd lost, Linda was gone. I hired investigators, combed through records, but she had vanished. She didn't want to be found." Rachel's throat tightened. She knew her mother knew the way Linda protected her like a fortress, how she kept secrets not out of deceit, but out of love. "She ran because she didn't want you near me," Rachel said softly. William nodded once, a slow, solemn motion. "I believe that now." He looked older than before. Not in his face, but in his energy, in the way his shoulders sagged with the weight of years spent wondering. "She didn't trust me to do right by you, and maybe she was right not to." Rachel backed away from the desk, her heart pounding. Her mother had carried this truth alone for decades. All those nights Rachel had asked about her father and been told vague stories, all those birthday wishes made without knowing whose eyes she had or where her stubbornness came from. It all made sense now. The truth wasn't that she had no father. The truth was she had been shielded from one. "She never told me about you," Rachel said, her voice breaking with quiet betrayal. "Not once. Not a hint. There had been no letters, no pictures, not even a name. Her mother had erased him completely." William's expression was unreadable, but his eyes glistened. "Because she didn't want you to grow up resenting me," he replied. "Or worse, waiting for someone who never came." Rachel turned away, her fingers trembling. There was a bitterness rising in her chest, but also a strange, sharp ache. She couldn't decide what hurt more, the fact that William had left, or the fact that her mother had never told her he existed. Love, even when it's protective, can still feel like a lie when truth comes too late. As silence fell between them, Rachel walked toward the window, needing to breathe. The skyline glittered below, indifferent to the storm inside her. She pressed her fingers to the cool glass, her mind racing. Everything she thought she knew about her past had shifted in a single conversation. Behind her, William spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I can't change what I did, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to understand it was never because I didn't care. I never stopped thinking about her, or wondering if she'd ever forgive me." Rachel didn't respond. She wasn't ready to offer understanding. Not yet. But one thing was certain, the man standing behind her was not just a stranger from her mother's past. He was a part of her story, whether she liked it or not. That night, the apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath Rachel's feet. The city pulsed outside her window, but she barely noticed it. Her thoughts were miles away, locked in the past, tangled in a story her mother had never told. She found herself drawn to the small wooden box tucked at the back of her closet, one she hadn't opened in years. It was her mother's memory box filled with keepsakes that smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Rachel sat on the floor and opened it slowly, hoping, maybe even needing Linda to offer something now from beyond the grave. Amid the old photographs, letters, and dried flowers, her hand brushed against something soft, a small velvet pouch she didn't remember seeing before. Carefully, she loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into her palm. A silver pendant fell out, simple and delicate, its surface worn from years of being held. 3 words were etched into the metal: forgive, love, begin. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Turning it over, she found a small, faded photograph embedded in the back. Her heart skipped. It was him, William Harris. Younger, smiling, his arm around a younger Linda. It was the first time she had seen them together, and the sight of it shook something deep inside her. A folded slip of paper fluttered out of the pouch. Unfolding it with trembling fingers, she recognized her mother's handwriting, soft and careful. "This belonged to your father. I kept it for you. One day you'll understand. Mum." Rachel sat in stunned silence, the pendant nestled in her palm like a secret waiting its turn. Her mother had hidden so much. Not out of malice, but perhaps out of fear or protection or both. The note was short, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. Linda hadn't just erased William, she had preserved a piece of him. Saved it. For this moment. The photo, the message, the pendant. They weren't just mementos. They were instructions. Forgive, love, begin. Rachel wiped her eyes, her heart caught in a whirlwind of grief, clarity, and a strange, unfamiliar hope. Her mother had given her a choice, one she never had herself, and Rachel knew what she had to do. The next morning, Rachel dressed not in anger, but in quiet determination. This time, she wasn't walking into Harris & Co. Holdings as a stranger desperate for answers. She was walking in as his daughter. She clutched the pendant in her hand as she crossed the lobby, her steps firmer than before. The receptionist started to deliver the same dismissive line as last time, but Rachel interrupted. "Tell William Harris," she said, placing the pendant gently on the desk, "that his daughter is here." The woman's eyes widened slightly. There was a moment of hesitation. Then she reached for the phone. Security guards moved toward Rachel, but before they could speak, a calm, commanding voice echoed through the marble hall. "Let her in." William stood at the end of the corridor, unreadable as ever, though his eyes flicked briefly to the pendant in the receptionist's hand. He turned and walked toward his office without saying a word. Rachel followed, her heart thudding but her hands steady. When the door closed behind them, silence fell like a curtain. She didn't waste time. She stepped forward, placed the pendant on his desk, and met his gaze directly. "Explain this," she said. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, with a softness she hadn't expected, he whispered, "She kept it." His fingers hovered above it, but didn't touch. "She never stopped thinking about me." Rachel swallowed, emotions rising. "She didn't just keep it. She left it for me. She wanted me to know who you were, not just the man who walked away, but the man she once loved." William looked up, and for the first time Rachel saw something crumble in him. A rawness, a sorrow. "I didn't know," he admitted, his voice cracking. "If I had known about you, I would have—" He stopped himself, as if finishing the sentence would break him. Rachel nodded slowly. "But you didn't know," she said, "because you left." Her words weren't cruel. They were just true. But even as the silence returned, it no longer felt hostile. It felt open, unfinished, like a door not yet closed. She stood still, letting the truth settle between them. Her mother's silence, William's regret, her own uncertainty, but also the pendant, small and fragile, yet somehow powerful enough to hold all of it. Rachel looked down at it one last time before clasping it around her neck. The cool metal rested against her chest like a promise. "I don't know what this means yet," she said softly, "but I'm not here as a stranger anymore." William nodded, his eyes glistening. "No, you're not." They said nothing else, but for the first time, Rachel didn't feel like she was walking out of the room. She felt like she was stepping into a story she had always been a part of. She just hadn't known it yet. William stood behind his desk, shoulders, tense eyes fixed on the pendant, now resting gently against Rachel's chest. He seemed older in that moment, not in years, but in weight, in wear, in regret. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable this time, but reverent. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if unsure which version of the truth could be spoken without shattering whatever fragile thread still connected them. Finally, his voice came low and unsteady. "I didn't know," he said, not for the first time, but now with a tremor of something deeper. "I didn't know about you, Rachel. If I had, everything would have been different." He swallowed, hard pain flickering through his gaze. "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I would give anything just for the chance to know you now, to be in your life if you'll let me." Rachel looked at him, her arms crossed tightly, as if holding herself together. Her heart was an unruly storm, grief, anger, curiosity, hope all colliding beneath her skin. Part of her wanted to scream at him for the years he had stolen without even realizing it. For the birthdays missed the questions unanswered, the absence that had carved itself silently into her childhood. But another part, the one that remembered the tenderness in her mother's voice when she spoke of love, wondered what it might mean to let him try. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said, each word clear and heavy. "Not yet." William didn't flinch. He simply nodded, accepting her honesty like a sentence passed down with mercy. "That's okay," he murmured. "I wouldn't expect you to." Her fingers brushed the pendant unconsciously, feeling the etching against her skin. Forgive. Love. Begin. It wasn't a prescription. It was an invitation one her mother had left behind, not just for clarity, but perhaps for courage. Rachel had walked into this building seeking a confrontation. What she had found was something far more complicated, a father she never knew. She had a man drowning in remorse, and a version of the past rewritten in softer tones than she ever imagined. "You don't get to rewrite what happened," she said gently, "but maybe we can decide what happens next." William exhaled something like relief breaking through the tightness in his expression. "I would like that," he said, "even if it's just a conversation now and then, even if it takes time." Rachel nodded slowly. She wasn't making promises. She wasn't offering closure. What she was offering was the space between silence and forgiveness, a place where truth could live without needing to be tidy. She walked toward the door, not with anger or hesitation, but with her own agency. This time she wasn't storming out or being dismissed. She was choosing to leave on her own terms, knowing that distance didn't mean disconnection. William didn't follow. He simply watched as if afraid to break the spell, as if honoring the moment was the only thing he could give her that wouldn't feel like taking. As she stepped into the hallway, the pendant still resting against her collarbone, Rachel felt something shift inside her. Not peace, not yet, but possibility. The woman she was before would have demanded answers, demanded punishment, demanded understanding. But the woman walking out now carried something her mother had left behind, the capacity to choose. Not everything had to be resolved in a single conversation. Not every ending needed to be clean. Some stories weren't meant to be rewritten in full, but maybe, just maybe, they could be continued with care if both people were willing to try. By the time she reached the lobby, the city had begun to wake. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows, casting long golden lines across the floor. Rachel paused before stepping outside. The pendant was warm, now a small weight grounding her to the present. She didn't know what would come next, whether this man could ever truly be her father, whether healing could come after so many silent years. But she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't closing the door. Not yet. Some wounds take time, and some beginnings don't come at the start, but somewhere in the middle when hearts are finally ready to open. If this story moved, you take a moment to reflect on the quiet strength it takes to open a door that's been closed for too long. At Deep Inside HQ, we bring you powerful emotional journeys that uncover hidden truths, heal old wounds, and remind us all that it's never too late to begin again. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if this story touched your heart. And if you've ever had to choose between silence and forgiveness, we'd love to hear your story in the comments. Your voice matters, and someone out there may need it more than you know.